For 30 years, Joel Goldsmith searched every religion, every philosophy, every healing method known to humanity. What he discovered in a moment of desperate silence changed everything we thought we knew about God, healing, and the very nature of reality itself. This wasn't just another spiritual teaching. Most people pray to God, asking for things, begging for help, hoping for miracles from some distant divine power. Joel discovered we've been approaching this completely backward for centuries. The revolutionary truth he uncovered doesn't just heal bodies. It transforms entire lives in ways that seem impossible. The secret isn't about getting God's attention or becoming worthy of divine love. It's about realizing something so profound, so simple, that when you truly understand it, physical healing, emotional freedom, and material abundance become natural expressions of what you already are. This discovery shattered every religious assumption Joel had ever held. It challenged the very foundation of traditional Christianity and opened a doorway to what he called the mystical path, a way of living that makes miracles ordinary and transforms every moment into a sacred encounter. Here's what Joel realized that night in 1946 during his deepest spiritual crisis. God isn't separate from you, waiting somewhere in heaven to be contacted through prayer or worship. God is your very consciousness when it's free from the illusion of separation. This isn't philosophy. This is practical foundation for miracles. Think about it carefully. Every time you've experienced peace, love, or sudden knowing that transcended your circumstances, you weren't contacting something outside yourself. You were experiencing your true nature without the interference of fear-based thinking. Joel called this the Christ within, your divine identity. When you stop seeking God out there and recognize the divine presence as your own consciousness expressing itself as your life, something extraordinary happens. Problems don't get solved through effort. They dissolve because you're no longer creating them from a place of separation and lack. This recognition changes everything about how you approach challenges, relationships, health, and abundance. You're no longer a limited human being seeking help from God. Your divine consciousness itself, expressing as your individual human experience. Joel discovered what he called the practicing of the presence. But this isn't meditation as most people know it. This is a radical shift in how you perceive reality moment by moment. You stop seeing yourself as a human being having occasional spiritual experiences during prayer or meditation. Instead, you begin recognizing yourself as spiritual consciousness having a human experience. When this recognition becomes natural rather than something you have to remember to do, your entire relationship with challenges, health, relationships, and abundance transforms at the core level. The practicing isn't something you do for 20 minutes in the morning and evening. It becomes the foundation from which you live every moment of your day. You begin to see through the appearances of discord to the underlying harmony that's always been present. You start recognizing that what you call problems are actually invitations to go deeper into truth. Every challenge becomes an opportunity to practice seeing through appearances to spiritual reality until this seeing becomes more natural than breathing itself. This is where Joel's teaching becomes revolutionary and challenges everything traditional religion has taught about the relationship between humanity and divinity. He taught that the moment you realize I and the Father are one, you stop being a person who needs healing and become the very presence that does the healing. You're not trying to get something from God. You are the God presence expressing itself as your individual consciousness. But here's the part most teachers miss completely. This realization doesn't happen through effort, technique, or years of spiritual practice. It happens through what Joel called resting in the silence of being. When thoughts stop trying to fix, change, or improve anything, when the mind releases its grip on outcomes and solutions, truth reveals itself naturally. A woman came to Joel with terminal cancer that doctors said was incurable. Instead of treating her condition, he sat with her in this silence of being. Within weeks, every trace of cancer had disappeared from her body. The doctors called it medically impossible. Joel knew it was spiritually inevitable once the illusion of separation dissolved and her true spiritual identity was recognized and experienced. Margaret had struggled with chronic pain for 15 years that dominated every aspect of her daily life. Doctors, specialists, alternative healers, pain management clinics, Nothing provided lasting relief. She'd tried every spiritual method imaginable, from positive thinking to energy healing, but the pain persisted relentlessly. When she finally encountered Joel's teaching through a friend, she was skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. The first breakthrough came not during formal meditation, but while washing dishes one ordinary Tuesday morning. She suddenly realized she'd been seeking healing as Margaret, the suffering person. In that moment of washing dishes, something extraordinary happened. Margaret, the person with chronic pain, disappeared from her awareness, and only pure awareness remained. Awareness without pain, without story, without the identity that had been suffering for 15 years. The pain was simply absent. Within 3 months, the chronic pain that had defined her life for 15 years was completely gone. But more than that, Margaret discovered she was living from a completely different foundation. Fear-based thinking had lost its grip on her consciousness entirely, and life became an adventure rather than an endurance test. Robert was facing complete financial ruin after 20 years of building his business. Bankruptcy papers were being prepared, creditors were calling daily, and his marriage was falling apart under the crushing weight of financial pressure. Traditional positive thinking and manifestation techniques had only made him feel more frustrated and hopeless. Joel taught him something radically different from anything he'd encountered in self-help or prosperity teachings. Instead of trying to demonstrate prosperity or attract abundance from outside himself, Robert learned to recognize the abundance that was already present in his consciousness as his spiritual birthright. He stopped seeing himself as lacking and needing to attract abundance from some external source. As Robert began living from this recognition of inherent wholeness rather than acquired prosperity, opportunities appeared naturally without force or struggle. His consciousness shifted from scarcity to abundance. Within 6 months, not only was his business thriving beyond his previous success, but his relationships had transformed because he was no longer operating from fear and desperation. He was expressing from fullness rather than grasping from emptiness, and life responded accordingly. Sarah had been battling severe depression for most of her adult life, spending years in therapy and trying various medications that provided some relief, but never addressed the underlying emptiness. She'd tried meditation, spiritual practices, self-help programs. Some provided temporary uplift, but nothing created lasting transformation. Through Joel's teaching, Sarah discovered that depression wasn't something wrong with her that needed to be fixed through treatment or positive thinking. It was the natural result of consciousness believing it was separate from its source, cut off from the love and wholeness that is its true nature. When this fundamental belief in separation dissolved through recognition of her true spiritual identity, depression couldn't maintain itself anymore. The shift happened gradually over several weeks as Sarah began experiencing moments of causeless joy and deep peace that had no external reason or trigger. These moments expanded and deepened until they became her natural state, rather than temporary experiences. The person who had been depressed for decades simply was no longer there. A new foundation for living had been established that was unshakable by external circumstances. James had been seeking spiritual truth for 20 years through various teachers, traditions, and practices. He'd had profound experiences, moments of awakening and deep peace, but somehow always seemed to fall back into old patterns of thinking and reacting to life's challenges with the same fears and frustrations. What Joel revealed changed everything about James's approach to spirituality. James realized he'd been treating spirituality as something he did rather than something he was. He'd been seeking enlightenment as a future attainment, rather than recognizing his true nature as already enlightened consciousness, temporarily forgetting itself. The moment he stopped seeking enlightenment and recognized his true nature as already enlightened consciousness, simply having a temporary human experience, everything shifted permanently. The spiritual search ended not because he found what he was looking for, but because he realized he'd never actually lost it. James describes it as coming home to himself after 20 years of looking everywhere else for what had always been present. The seeking ended, but spiritual living began in a completely natural, effortless way that integrated seamlessly with daily human responsibilities and relationships. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. What healing journey resonated most with you? Beyond the primary realization of oneness, Joel developed what he called spiritual treatment. But this isn't treatment as most people understand it. This isn't sending thoughts, energy, or prayers to fix problems. It's recognizing the spiritual truth that dissolves the illusion, creating the appearance of the problem in the first place. When someone calls asking for help with a health challenge, financial crisis, or relationship conflict, a Joel Goldsmith practitioner doesn't try to heal the condition or solve the problem. Instead, they rest in the recognition that in spiritual truth, there is no person with a condition. There is only perfect spiritual being expressing. This recognition and consciousness has immediate and tangible effects in what we call the physical world. Symptoms disappear, relationships heal, financial situations resolve, not because something was sent to fix them, but because the truth of being dissolved the illusion that created the appearance of discord. The practitioner becomes a transparency for truth rather than a person trying to help another person. This complete shift in identity from helper to transparency for divine consciousness is what makes Joel's approach to healing so remarkably effective and permanent. Joel taught what he called spiritual discernment, the developed ability to see beyond appearances to spiritual reality in every situation you encounter. When you look at a magnificent sunset, you're not simply seeing colored light hitting particles in the atmosphere. You're witnessing infinite beauty expressing itself in form. This same discernment applies to everything in your experience throughout the day. When you see lack, discord, disease, or limitation, you're looking at appearances that have no spiritual reality. Spiritual discernment reveals the underlying perfection that's always present, always available to be experienced by consciousness. The practice isn't about denying what appears to be happening or pretending problems don't exist. It's about recognizing what's really happening behind the appearances. Divine consciousness expressing itself perfectly, even when that perfection is temporarily obscured by limited perception. This recognition naturally transforms your experience without effort or struggle. You don't change the appearances, you see through them to reality, and the appearances naturally align with the truth you're recognizing rather than the illusion you were believing. One of Joel's most powerful and transformative techniques was what he called the art of dying daily. This isn't about physical death. It's about the daily dying of the personal sense of self that believes it's separate from God, from good, from the wholeness that is its true nature. Every time you catch yourself thinking as a person who lacks something, needs something, or fears something, you can let that personal sense die in that moment. In its place, you recognize yourself as the very presence of completeness, expressing itself as your individual experience of life. This dying to the personal sense becomes so natural and automatic that you begin living from spiritual identity rather than human identity, without effort or constant remembering. From this foundation, what humans call miracles become normal, natural expressions of what you actually are. The daily practice of dying to limitation and being reborn to truth creates a momentum of transformation that eventually becomes self-sustaining. You no longer have to work at being spiritual. You simply are spiritual consciousness expressing as human experience. Joel discovered that the key to permanent transformation lies in what he called the middle path, living fully human while knowing yourself as divine consciousness. You don't transcend the human experience or escape into some ethereal spiritual realm. You live human life from your true spiritual foundation. This means you pay your bills, maintain your relationships, care for your body, and fulfill your responsibilities. But you do all of this from the recognition of your true nature rather than from fear, lack, or the belief that you're separate from infinite good. The middle path dissolves the old spiritual misconception that you must choose between being spiritual and being practical. You become supremely practical because you're operating from truth rather than illusion, from abundance rather than limitation, from love rather than fear. Daily life becomes a continuous expression of spiritual principles rather than a distraction from them. Work becomes worship, relationships become holy encounters, and the most ordinary activities become opportunities to express divine creativity and love. But let's be completely honest about the challenges you'll face as you begin living these truths. The mind that's been conditioned for years or decades to think in terms of separation, lack, and limitation doesn't instantly embrace these revolutionary ideas. You might experience what Joel called periods of spiritual dryness. During these challenging times, the old thinking patterns seem to return with a vengeance. You might doubt everything you've learned, feel like you're back where you started, or wonder if any of this spiritual understanding is real or just wishful thinking and self-deception. Joel taught that these periods are actually signs of genuine progress, not failure or spiritual regression. They're the final attempts of conditioned thinking to maintain its grip on your consciousness. The key is not to fight these experiences, but to continue resting in truth even when you don't feel it. These dark nights of the soul, as mystics have called them, are temporary and necessary parts of the transformation process. They're opportunities to prove that your spiritual understanding doesn't depend on feeling good or having positive experiences. Another common challenge that can derail spiritual progress is what Joel called spiritual pride, the subtle tendency to believe you're more evolved, more enlightened, or spiritually superior to others who haven't discovered these truths. This form of separation can actually block your continued spiritual unfoldment. The antidote to spiritual pride is genuine humility, recognizing that spiritual understanding is a gift of grace, not a personal achievement or accomplishment. You didn't earn or deserve this awareness any more than you earned the ability to breathe or your heart's ability to beat automatically. When spiritual pride arises, and it will arise subtly even in sincere seekers, return immediately to the simplicity of gratitude. Be grateful that truth is revealing itself through your consciousness, and let that gratitude dissolve any sense of spiritual superiority or separation from others. Remember that everyone is the same divine consciousness expressing at different levels of recognition. Your role is to be transparent for truth, not to judge others' spiritual development or try to convince them of what you've discovered. Perhaps the most challenging aspect of Joel's teaching is learning to live without the mental habit of trying to use spiritual truth to get something. The conditioned mind wants to turn these principles into techniques for manifesting desires, solving problems, or achieving better life circumstances. But the moment you try to use truth to get something, you've stepped back into the consciousness of separation. You've become a person who lacks something and is trying to use spirituality to acquire it. True spiritual living means recognizing that you already are everything you could ever need or want. This doesn't mean desires disappear or that you become passive about improving your life circumstances. It means your desires arise from fullness rather than emptiness, and their fulfillment happens naturally as expressions of what you are, rather than acquisitions by who you think you are. The shift from using truth to being truth is subtle but crucial. When you are truth expressing, your life naturally reflects that truth without effort, manipulation, or trying to make things happen through spiritual techniques. The ultimate challenge in Joel's path is what he called the final sacrifice, giving up even the desire for spiritual experiences, spiritual progress, or advanced spiritual understanding. As long as you're seeking something spiritual, you're maintaining the illusion of separation from what you seek. The resolution comes through grace, spontaneous moments when seeking stops not because you found what you were looking for, but because you suddenly realize the seeker and the sought are one and have always been one. These moments of grace can't be produced through effort, but they can be welcomed. When you stop trying to become spiritual and simply rest in what you are right now, the spiritual nature of your being reveals itself naturally. This is the end of the spiritual path because you realize there was never anywhere to go or anything to attain. The final sacrifice leads to the ultimate freedom, living without spiritual seeking while being constantly aware of your spiritual nature. You become ordinary in the most extraordinary way, completely human while completely divine. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment. Which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Living Joel's teaching in daily life means bringing this consciousness of oneness into every situation, relationship, and challenge you encounter. When your coworker irritates you with their behavior, instead of reacting from personality and old conditioning, you recognize the Christ in them, and the Christ as your own true identity. This isn't about being nice, tolerant, or spiritually correct. It's about seeing through the personal appearances to spiritual reality. When you consistently see from this perspective, relationships become harmonious not because people change their behavior to please you, but because you're seeing their true nature. At work, Instead of competing, manipulating, or struggling for advancement, you express your spiritual qualities, creativity, wisdom, love, intelligence, naturally and authentically. Opportunities arise because you're being authentic spiritual expression rather than a personality trying to get something. Your presence at work becomes uplifting to others, not because you're preaching or teaching spirituality, but because you're living from a foundation of peace and wholeness that others unconsciously recognize and are drawn to. In parenting, Joel's principles create profound harmony and understanding between parents and children. Instead of seeing your children as people you need to control, guide, or fix, you recognize them as spiritual beings expressing their divine nature through the temporary experience of childhood. This recognition allows you to guide and discipline from love rather than fear, from wisdom rather than control. Children respond to this spiritual recognition with natural cooperation because they're being seen and treated as the divine beings they actually are, not just as small humans with problems. Family conflicts resolve more easily because you're not taking personal behavior personally. You see through temporary emotional expressions to the permanent spiritual identity of each family member. This doesn't mean you become permissive. It means you respond from wisdom rather than reaction. The home becomes a sanctuary where everyone feels safe to express their authentic nature because they're being seen and loved for what they are, rather than judged for what they do or don't do. Financial challenges become opportunities to prove spiritual principles in practical, tangible ways. Instead of seeing money as something external you need to attract, earn, or struggle for, you recognize abundance as the very nature of infinite consciousness, expressing itself as your experience. This doesn't mean becoming passive about money or ignoring practical responsibilities. It means approaching financial obligations and opportunities from spiritual abundance, rather than material lack. You make wise decisions, work diligently, and manage resources responsibly from fullness rather than fear. Many practitioners find that as they live from this recognition of inherent abundance, their financial situations naturally improve not through struggle, manifestation techniques, or trying to attract money, but as natural expressions of the abundance they recognize themselves to be. Money becomes a tool for expressing love, rather than a source of security or identity. This shift in relationship to money often results in greater financial freedom because decisions are made from wisdom rather than fear or greed. Physical health becomes a natural expression of spiritual wholeness when you begin recognizing your body as the visible expression of perfect spiritual being, rather than a material thing that can get sick or break down. This recognition transforms your entire approach to health and healing. This understanding doesn't replace medical care when needed, but it provides the spiritual foundation that supports all healing, whether through medicine, natural methods, or spontaneous resolution. You work with healthcare providers from wisdom rather than fear, making decisions from wholeness rather than desperation. The body responds to being seen and treated as spiritual rather than merely material. Many practitioners report improved health, increased vitality, and faster healing as natural results of living from spiritual identity rather than material identification. You begin to understand that symptoms are often consciousness expressing imbalance, and as consciousness returns to its natural state of wholeness, the body naturally reflects that harmony. Health becomes normal rather than something you have to work to maintain. As Joel's teaching becomes your natural way of being rather than something you practice, you discover what he called the healing consciousness. You begin to have a positive, uplifting effect on everyone you encounter, often without saying anything specifically spiritual or trying to help anyone. People are naturally drawn to the peace they feel in your presence. They open up, share their challenges, and often find their own solutions simply through being around someone who is resting in spiritual truth, rather than reacting from personal conditioning and fear. This healing presence becomes so natural that you often don't realize you're having this effect on others. You're simply being yourself, your true spiritual self, and that authenticity creates space for others to connect with their own truth and find their own answers. You become a living demonstration of spiritual principles rather than someone who talks about them. This demonstration is far more powerful than any words because people can feel the reality of what you've discovered through your presence. Years of living these principles consistently create what Joel called spiritual stability. the developed ability to remain centered in truth regardless of external circumstances. Economic upheavals, health challenges, relationship conflicts no longer throw you into emotional chaos or mental confusion. You respond to life's inevitable challenges with wisdom and love because you're responding from spiritual identity rather than personal reaction. This doesn't mean you become emotionless or detached. It means your emotions arise from truth rather than illusion. This stability becomes a precious gift to everyone in your life. In times of crisis, you naturally become a source of calm, wisdom, and practical guidance because you're seeing clearly rather than reacting from fear or personal attachment to specific outcomes. People learn to trust your perspective because it comes from a place of spiritual discernment rather than personal opinion or emotional reaction. You become someone others can depend on for balanced, loving guidance. The ultimate fruit of Joel's teaching is what he called the mystical life, living in constant conscious communion with the divine presence that you are. Prayer becomes an ongoing recognition of truth rather than periodic asking for help, guidance, or intervention from an external God. Every moment becomes an opportunity to witness infinite love expressing itself as your experience and the experience of everyone around you. Work becomes worship, relationships become holy encounters, and the most ordinary activities become expressions of divine creativity. You realize that the mystical life isn't separate from ordinary human life. It's ordinary human life lived from your true spiritual identity. Nothing in your external circumstances needs to change except the foundation from which you perceive and respond to everything. The mystical life is available to everyone because everyone is spiritual consciousness expressing as individual human experience. Joel's teaching shows you how to recognize and live from this truth consistently. This is what Joel Goldsmith uncovered in that moment of desperate silence. Not a new religion, spiritual practice, or self-improvement technique, but the eternal truth of what you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning, seeking, and spiritual effort. You are divine consciousness individualized, expressing as your unique human experience. The journey doesn't end with understanding these principles intellectually or having occasional spiritual experiences. It begins with living them moment by moment until they become more natural than breathing, more automatic than your heartbeat. This is your birthright, your true identity, your permanent spiritual foundation. You don't need to become spiritual, achieve enlightenment, or earn God's love. You need to stop believing you're anything other than the spiritual being you've always been. When this recognition becomes your natural state of consciousness, you discover that everything you ever sought through spirituality has always been your own true nature. The search ends, but life begins. Life lived from the foundation of truth, rather than the quicksand of illusion. This is Joel Goldsmith's gift to humanity, the recognition that what we seek, we are. What we hope to become, we already are. What we long for, we have never been without. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.
What if I told you that the very thing you've been seeking your entire life, peace, security, freedom from fear, has never been absent for even a moment? What if the divine presence you've been praying to reach has been closer than your own breath, waiting not to be found, but to be recognized? The universal promise. When the Master said, "I am with you always," he wasn't offering comfort for difficult times. He was revealing the eternal truth of being itself. This wasn't Jesus, the man, making a promise. This was the Christ, the divine consciousness that formed itself as Jesus, speaking the fundamental reality of all existence. You see, most of us have been conditioned to believe that God is somewhere out there in heaven, in temples, in sacred texts. And so we pray to God, we seek for God, we hope that God will hear us and come to us in our moment of need. But this very seeking perpetuates the illusion of separation that is the root of all fear. The nature of fear, let us look honestly at fear. What is it? Strip away all the different forms it takes: fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of illness, fear of death, and you'll find one core belief: I am alone. I am separate. I am vulnerable. Fear is always the voice of the separated sense of self, the ego that believes it is a fragment cut off from the whole, a wave that has forgotten it is the ocean. But here is the great revelation that mystics throughout all ages have discovered. There is no separate self to be afraid. There is only one self, one infinite consciousness, one divine presence expressing itself as the many. When Jesus said, "I am with you," he wasn't describing a relationship between two beings. He was revealing that there is only one I, and that divine I is the truth of your being right now, the Christ within now. This isn't mere philosophy or beautiful poetry. This is meant to be your living experience. The Christ isn't a historical figure you worship. The Christ is the name we give to God, individualized, to infinite consciousness, expressing as individual being. The Christ is what you are when the false sense of separate selfhood dissolves. When you sit in the silence, not the silence of an empty mind, but the silence that is alive with presence, you begin to feel this truth. You don't feel that God is with you, you experience that God is being you. The breath breathing itself, the heart beating itself, the awareness aware of itself. This isn't pantheism, this is the recognition that God constitutes your very being. From belief to experience, most spiritual seekers make a critical error. They try to use truth as a tool to fix their human problems. They want God to make their businesses successful, to heal their bodies, to protect their loved ones. And yes, harmony does appear in our experience as we awaken, but it doesn't come from using God, it comes from being God realized. You cannot demonstrate the presence, you can only be the presence aware of itself. Do you see the difference? One is still rooted in the belief that you are a person who needs God's help. The other is the recognition that the divine self is already living as you, and your only task is to stop interfering with its natural expression. When Jesus walked on water, he didn't pray to God for the power to defy gravity. He lived from the consciousness that knows I and my Father are one. There is no separation between the wave and the ocean, and so natural law bends to spiritual truth. Practical mysticism. Now, how do we move from intellectual understanding to lived experience? Through what we might call practical mysticism, the daily practice of turning within to that inner presence. Begin each day not with prayers of petition, not with affirmations, not with reading, but with silence. Sit quietly and dismiss every thought that enters. Not through struggle, but through recognition. That's just a thought. That's just mental activity. And in the space between thoughts, you'll begin to feel something, not think something, but feel something, a presence, a stillness, an isness that has no opposite. This presence isn't giving you anything because this presence is already all that you are. It isn't protecting you from danger because in truth there is nothing outside this infinite one that threatens you. It isn't with you, it is you. Living without fear, as this awareness deepens, something miraculous happens, fear dissolves, not because your circumstances change, though they often do, not because you've been given promises or protection, though you begin to witness what looks like protection. Fear dissolves because the one who was afraid is seen through as an illusion. There's a beautiful paradox here. When you realize there is no separate self to protect, you discover you are protected by the very nature of being itself. When you stop trying to preserve and defend your personal sense of self, you find yourself living as the eternal self that has never been born and can never die. The practice of presence, this isn't something you achieve once and possess forever. This is a practice, a remembering, a constant return to the awareness of presence. Throughout your day, pause, stop whatever mental or physical activity you're engaged in and recognize the presence is here. The presence is here as my very consciousness. I and the Father are one. When challenges appear, and they will appear because we're living in a world that still believes in separation, don't fight them on their own level. Don't try to use spiritual truth to fix material problems. Instead, turn within to that place of presence and rest there until the problem is seen as the illusion it is. You cannot be with God and have fear at the same time. They're incompatible. Fear exists only in the belief of separation, and presence is the experience of unity. The great release, what freedom lies in this realization. You don't have to become spiritual enough. You don't have to practice long enough. You don't have to earn God's grace. You are already the very thing you've been seeking. The Christ consciousness that formed itself as Jesus is the same consciousness that is forming itself as you right now, in this moment. Your only task, if we can even call it a task, is to stop, be still, and know. Not know about God, know God. Experience the presence that is closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. Closing truth. So when you feel fear arising, remember these words, I am with you, not as a promise of future comfort, but as a present reality. The divine I is with you, because the divine I is you. There is nowhere you can go where this presence is not, because this presence is the very substance of your being. Do not fear. Not because nothing bad will happen. We're not making promises about human circumstances. Do not fear because you are finally awakening to what you are, the eternal, infinite, divine consciousness expressing as individual being. And that which is eternal has nothing to fear, for it has never been born and cannot die. This is the great secret the Master revealed before Abraham was, I am. Not I was, I am. The eternal now, the divine presence, and this same I am is the truth of your being. Live from this recognition, and you'll find yourself living a new kind of life, not free from challenges, but free within them. Not separate from God-seeking connection, but as God made manifest, living, breathing, being the divine presence itself. The divine presence is already within. God's presence isn't something we need to acquire or earn. It is the very substance of our being, waiting only for our recognition. Fear is the illusion of separation. All fear stems from the false belief that we are alone and separate from the infinite source that sustains all life. I am with you means I am as you. Christ consciousness isn't outside ourselves watching over us. It is the true identity of our being, the divine self that animates our existence. Contemplative silence reveals truth beyond words, beliefs, and mental. Striving lies the direct experience of presence that dissolves all anxiety and limitation. Living from Christthood, not seeking it. The spiritual life isn't about becoming something we're not, but recognizing what we already are and living from that realized truth. The divine presence isn't floating somewhere in a distant heaven, waiting for your prayers to reach it. It isn't standing outside your experience, observing you from afar, deciding whether to intervene in your affairs. This is the revolutionary truth that transforms everything. God is not separate from you, waiting to be contacted. God is the very consciousness by which you know you exist. Think for a moment about your awareness right now. You are aware that you're reading these words. You are aware of thoughts moving through your mind. You are aware of sensations in your body. But what is this awareness itself? This witnessing presence that observes everything, where does it come from? This is the divine presence. This is God being conscious as you. We've been taught to acquire spiritual qualities, to develop our connection with the divine, to become worthy enough to experience God's presence. But this entire paradigm is backwards. You cannot acquire what already constitutes your being. The eye cannot see itself, yet it is always present. The awareness cannot be aware of itself as an object, yet it is eternally here. In the same way, the divine presence is so intimate, so fundamental to your existence, that you've overlooked it your entire life while searching for something more dramatic, more distant, more difficult to attain. When you breathe, who is breathing? When your heart beats, who is beating it? When thoughts arise in consciousness, what is the consciousness in which they arise? This isn't poetic language. This is direct observation of reality. There is an infinite intelligence animating what you call your life, and this intelligence isn't something you possess. Rather, you are something this intelligence is doing. The great mystics didn't become holy people who finally reached God after years of effort. They simply woke up to what was always true. They recognized that the presence they had been seeking outwardly was the very substance of their innermost being, not a presence that came to them, but the presence they had always been. This recognition changes everything. You stop begging for what you already are. You stop seeking what has never been absent. You begin to live from a different center, not from the small, frightened self that feels separate and vulnerable, but from the infinite self that knows itself as the very ground of being. And this knowing isn't intellectual, it's a felt experience available to you right now in the simple recognition of the awareness that is aware of these very words. Fear, in all its manifestations, tells the same fundamental lie: you are alone in a hostile universe. Whether you fear poverty, illness, rejection, or death itself, the underlying message is identical. You are a separate fragment, vulnerable and isolated, at the mercy of forces beyond your control. But this narrative is built on a fiction so convincing that humanity has believed it for millennia. Watch fear closely when it arises. Notice that it always involves a sense of me that could be threatened, diminished, or destroyed. There's a self that might lose something precious. There's an identity that could be damaged. There's a person who stands apart from life itself, exposed to danger. This self, this separate me, is the breeding ground of all fear. Without the belief in separation, fear cannot exist. But here's what contemplative inquiry reveals. This separate self you've taken yourself to be is a mental construct, a collection of thoughts, memories, and conditioning that creates the illusion of being a distinct entity cut off from the whole. You've been hypnotized by your own thinking into believing you are a wave that somehow became disconnected from the ocean. The wave fears it will crash on the shore and disappear, not realizing it was never separate from the ocean to begin with. Every moment of fear is actually a moment of amnesia, a forgetting of your true nature as infinite consciousness itself. When you believe you are merely this body, this personality, this accumulation of experiences, you naturally fear anything that threatens this fragile construction. The body can sicken, relationships can end, possessions can be lost, success can turn to failure. And so you live in a constant state of vigilance, trying to protect what you believe yourself to be. But the divine presence knows no separation. In God's awareness, there are no isolated fragments, no separate cells competing for survival. There is only the one appearing as the many, the ocean expressing as countless waves, each wave a unique manifestation, yet never separate from the whole. This isn't philosophy. This is the actual nature of reality that fear obscures. When Jesus said, "I am with you," he was pointing to this indivisible unity. Not that God is accompanying you on your journey, but that the divine I is the only reality, expressing as what you call your existence. There is no gap between God and you that fear could inhabit. There is no distance across which danger could reach. There is only the infinite presence being all that is. The spiritual path isn't about destroying fear through willpower or positive thinking. It's about seeing through the illusion of separation that makes fear possible. When you recognize yourself as consciousness itself, not a thing in consciousness, but consciousness being aware, the one who was afraid is revealed as a phantom, and phantoms once seen clearly lose their power to frighten. This is why every spiritual tradition teaches some form of self-inquiry or meditation, not to acquire something new, but to dissolve the false sense of separation that is the root of all suffering. In the light of true seeing, fear doesn't need to be. Overcome it's simply recognized as the voice of an illusory self that never actually existed. Most people interpret Christ's promise, "I am with you always," as a comforting assurance that Jesus, or God, will accompany them through life's difficulties, like a divine companion walking beside them, ready to help when called upon. But this understanding, while comforting, misses the profound depth of what was actually being revealed. The Christ wasn't describing a relationship between two separate beings. The Christ was revealing identity itself. When the Master spoke these words, he wasn't speaking as Jesus the person, the man born in Bethlehem. He was speaking as the Christ, the divine consciousness that had realized itself fully in and through that individual expression. And what this consciousness was declaring is that it isn't merely with you in the sense of proximity or companionship, it is you. The I that said, "I am with you," is the same I that looks out through your eyes right now. This is the great mystery that transforms religion into realization. Christ consciousness isn't something outside yourself that watches over you. It's the deepest truth of what you are. When you say "I am," when you experience that fundamental sense of existence and awareness, you're touching the same infinite I am that spoke through Jesus, through Buddha, through every mystic who has awakened to their true nature. Consider the implications of this. If Christ is as you, rather than merely with you, then you're not waiting for divine intervention from outside. You're not hoping that God will notice your struggles and send help. You're recognizing that the very power and presence you've been praying to is the consciousness by which you pray, the awareness in which all experience arises, the life that is living itself as what you call you. This understanding completely transforms your spiritual practice. You stop begging an external God for what you need. You stop feeling like a limited human trying to contact an unlimited divine. Instead, you begin to live from the recognition that divinity is your actual nature, temporarily obscured by the belief in being merely a separate person. The great teachers didn't have something you lack. They simply woke up to what they already were. They stopped identifying with the limited, personal sense of self and recognized themselves as the infinite expressing in individual form. And this same recognition is available to you, not as a future attainment, but as a present reality waiting only for acknowledgement. This is why Jesus could say, "Greater works than these shall you do, and the kingdom of God is within you." He wasn't speaking to inferior beings from a superior position. He was speaking as awakened consciousness to sleeping consciousness, inviting the recognition that what appeared as Jesus Christ is the same divine presence that appears as you. When you realize that Christ is as you, everything changes. You're no longer a powerless human hoping for divine rescue. You're the divine itself, temporarily forgetting its nature, now remembering. The I that is with you always is the I that you are. There aren't two, there's only one, appearing as the infinite diversity of life while remaining forever indivisible, forever whole, forever present as the very substance of your being. Words can point to truth, but they cannot give you the direct experience of it. Books can describe the ocean, but reading about water will never make you wet. Sermons can eloquently explain the nature of divine presence, but all the explanations in the world cannot substitute for the moment when you actually feel that presence alive within you. This is why every authentic spiritual tradition, beneath all its outer forms and rituals, teaches some practice of entering the silence. But understand what this silence truly is. It isn't merely the absence of noise or the quieting of mental chatter, though these may accompany it. The silence we speak of is capital S, silence A. Living, conscious stillness that exists prior to all thought, all emotion, all perception. It's the background against which all experience appears, the canvas upon which life paints itself, the space in which all form arises and dissolves. When you sit in contemplative silence, you're not trying to achieve anything or become anything. You're not attempting to contact God or manufacture spiritual experiences. You're simply releasing your grip on all mental activity and allowing yourself to rest in what already is. You dismiss thoughts, not violently, not through struggle, but through gentle recognition. This is just thinking. This is just mental noise. And in that dismissal, in that release, something extraordinary reveals itself. At first you might experience it as peace, as a subtle sense of relief from the constant mental commentary that usually dominates consciousness. But as you deepen into this practice, as you return again and again to the silence, something more profound emerges. You begin to sense a presence that isn't created by your meditation, but simply becomes obvious when mental activity subsides. It's as if the noise of thinking had been drowning out a symphony that was playing all along. This presence has qualities that cannot be adequately described, but can only be known through direct experience. It feels substantial yet formless. It's deeply personal yet infinite. It's utterly still yet vibrantly alive. And most importantly, it doesn't feel like something separate from you that you're observing. It feels like what you actually are when the false sense of separate selfhood temporarily dissolves. In this silence, the questions that tormented you lose their power. The fears that seemed so real are seen as shadows cast by thought. The sense of being alone and vulnerable evaporates because in this depth of silence there is no separate you to be alone. There's only the infinite presence being aware of itself. This isn't mystical imagination or self-hypnosis. This is direct perception of reality as it actually is, unfiltered by the conceptual mind. Every great mystic throughout history has pointed to this same experience, described it with different words from different traditions, but always indicating the same living truth. Beyond thought lies the direct experience of the divine. You cannot think your way to God, you cannot reason your way into presence, but you can be still, release all mental striving, and allow the truth that has always been present to reveal itself. In the silence, the words, "I am with you," stop being a concept and become a lived reality that transforms everything. The greatest obstacle to spiritual awakening isn't sin or unworthiness. It's the belief that you need to become something you're not. For years, perhaps decades, you've been trying to reach God, to attain Christ consciousness, to achieve enlightenment, as if these were distant destinations requiring endless struggle and sacrifice. But this entire approach perpetuates the very illusion that causes all suffering, the belief that you are currently something less than divine, something separate from God that must bridge an impossible gap. This seeking mentality keeps you locked in spiritual infancy. You read books, attend workshops, practice techniques, all in the hope that someday, if you do enough, if you're good enough, if you pray hard enough, you'll finally arrive at the spiritual state you've been chasing. But here's the liberating truth that ends all seeking: you cannot become what you already are. Christthood isn't a destination, it's your present identity, simply unrecognized. When Jesus said before Abraham was, "I am," he wasn't claiming a special status that separated him from humanity. He was revealing the eternal nature that is true of all being, the I am that existed before time, that will exist after all forms dissolve, that is here right now reading these words. This is the Christ, not Jesus' exclusive possession, but the one divine self expressing as all that is. Living from this recognition is entirely different from seeking it. When you seek Christthood, you're operating from the belief that you're a limited human trying to become spiritual. You're looking forward to some future transformation, some moment when you'll finally get it. This keeps you trapped in time, in becoming, in the endless postponement of truth. But when you live from Christthood, from the recognition that divine consciousness is already the substance of your being, everything shifts. You don't ask, how can I become more spiritual? You ask, how can I stop pretending to be less than I am? You don't try to acquire divine qualities. You allow the divinity that already constitutes your being to express itself naturally. This isn't arrogance or spiritual bypassing. It's the difference between a wave trying to become the ocean and a wave recognizing it has always been the ocean, appearing in wave form. The wave doesn't need to transform itself into ocean substance. It needs to recognize what it already is. Living from this recognition means you stop using spiritual practices as tools to fix your human problems. You stop bargaining with God. Stop trying to demonstrate supply or health or harmony as if these were achievements that prove your spiritual progress. Instead, you rest in the awareness that the infinite divine presence is already living as you, already being you, already expressing as your consciousness right now. Does this mean you stop practicing meditation or contemplation? Not at all. But the purpose changes entirely. You no longer practice to become enlightened. You practice to remember what's true, to clear away the mental fog that obscures your eternal nature, to live consciously from the Christ identity that has never been absent. The spiritual journey, properly understood, isn't a journey at all. It's a standing still, a ceasing of the search, a recognition that what you've been seeking across time and space has been the seeker itself all along. You, already that which you seek. Now live from that truth. And so we return to where we began, but now with new eyes, with awakened understanding. I am with you always. These aren't words of comfort for the fearful. They are words of revelation for those ready to see. You are not a separate self navigating a dangerous world, hoping that God will protect you. You are the divine presence itself, temporarily believing the dream of separation, now awakening to what has always been true. The I that spoke through Jesus is the I that is reading these words right now. There are not two. There is only one, appearing as the infinite diversity of existence. So what will you do with this understanding? Will you file it away as beautiful philosophy, returning tomorrow to the same fears, the same sense of separation, the same seeking for what you already are? Or will you begin right now to live from this recognition? Each morning when you awaken, before the world rushes in with its demands and distractions, sit in the silence, not to become spiritual, but to remember what you are, not to contact God, but to recognize that God is the consciousness by which you are aware. Let this become your foundation, not belief, not hope, but direct experience of the presence that is closer than your own breath. And when fear arises, as it will, for you are still living in a world that believes in separation, don't fight it with willpower or positive affirmations. Simply return to the truth. I and my Father are one. The presence is here. The presence is here as me, not as words to repeat, but as reality to recognize. This is practical mysticism. This is the secret of living without fear. Not because your circumstances will always be pleasant, we make no such promises, but because you'll finally know who and what you are, the eternal, infinite, divine consciousness expressing in individual form, and that which is eternal has nothing to fear, for it was never born and cannot die. The Master's promise wasn't that he would be with you. The promise was that the I am that he knew himself to be is the same I am that you are, one infinite presence, one divine self, appearing as the many while remaining forever one. Go now and live from this truth. Not perfectly, perfection isn't required, but consciously remembering again and again, I am the presence. The presence is expressing as me. And in this recognition, all fear dissolves like darkness before the light. Thank you.
For 2,000 years, we have misunderstood one of the most powerful spiritual laws ever spoken. When Jesus said, "Give, and it shall be given unto you," he was not talking about charity. He was not talking about money. He was revealing a secret about consciousness that changes everything you think you know about receiving. Most people treat this teaching like a spiritual transaction. They give expecting to receive. They donate hoping for blessings. They serve while secretly counting what comes back. But this mercantile approach to spirituality blocks the very flow Jesus was describing. It turns divine law into human bargaining. Joel Goldsmith spent decades discovering what Jesus actually meant. He found that giving in the spiritual sense has nothing to do with physical objects or actions. It is about the giving of your consciousness, the radiation of your awareness, the sharing of your inner realization of truth. This is the secret that transforms everything. When you truly understand this principle as Goldsmith taught it, you stop trying to get anything from the universe. You stop manipulating spiritual laws for personal gain. You begin to give from the infinite source within you, and that is when the real miracles begin to unfold in your life. The traditional interpretation has created generations of spiritual seekers who give to get. They perform acts of kindness while watching for returns. They share resources while mentally calculating cosmic interest rates. This is not the teaching Jesus revealed. This is human nature dressed in spiritual language. Goldsmith discovered that biblical giving means something radically different. It means giving your attention to truth rather than appearances. It means giving your faith to the invisible rather than the visible. It means giving recognition to the spiritual reality behind all material forms. When Jesus spoke of giving, he was teaching about consciousness, not currency. He was revealing that what you acknowledge, recognize, and give your awareness to becomes your experience. If you give your consciousness to lack, you experience lack. If you give your consciousness to divine abundance, abundance flows. This understanding changes the entire spiritual journey. You are not trying to earn blessings through good behavior. You are not attempting to manipulate God through generous actions. You are learning to give your inner attention to the truth of infinite supply already present in consciousness. Consider how this works in practical terms. A woman named Catherine struggled financially for years despite tithing faithfully and volunteering constantly. She gave and gave, always expecting her breakthrough. She felt frustrated, even betrayed by the teaching. Where was her return? Then she encountered Goldsmith's writings on consciousness. She realized she had been giving things while withholding her consciousness. Even while donating money, her mind was fixed on her bills, her debts, her lack. She was giving materially, but taking mentally, constantly drawing from the appearance of limitation. Catherine began a new practice. Instead of forcing herself to give money she felt she lacked, she started giving her attention to the truth of infinite divine supply. She would sit quietly and acknowledge the presence of abundance in consciousness itself, not in her bank account. She gave recognition to this invisible reality. Within 3 months, unexpected opportunities appeared, not because she manipulated a cosmic vending machine, but because her consciousness had shifted from taking to giving. She was no longer trying to extract from the universe. She was radiating awareness of what already existed spiritually, and material circumstances reflected this inner change. The secret Joel Goldsmith uncovered goes even deeper. Giving in the spiritual sense means releasing your consciousness from the belief in limited supply altogether. It means giving up the mental struggle to get, achieve, earn, or deserve. You stop taking thoughts from the world and start giving truth from within. This is why Jesus connected giving with receiving in the same breath. It is not cause and effect across time. It is the same movement of consciousness. The moment you give recognition to spiritual truth, you receive the experience of that truth. They are simultaneous because they are one activity. Most people never experience this because they separate the giving from the receiving. They give today hoping to receive tomorrow. They give here expecting to receive there. But consciousness does not work that way. What you give your awareness to in this moment is what you receive as experience in this moment. When Goldsmith taught students to give spiritually, he meant give your consciousness to God, to truth, to the invisible reality of perfection. Stop taking your thoughts from appearances. Stop extracting your beliefs from circumstances. Begin to give from the infinite well within, and watch how receiving happens not as a future reward, but as a present reality. A man named Matteo had tried every manifestation technique for years. He visualized, affirmed, and gave generously to charities. Still, his business struggled. He felt exhausted by the constant mental effort to create results. Everything felt like taking, even his spiritual practices. Then Matteo read Goldsmith's teaching about giving consciousness rather than things. He realized his entire approach had been about extraction. Even his prayers were attempts to pull blessings from God. His affirmations were efforts to take from the universe. His giving was strategic manipulation. Matteo began a completely different practice. Each morning, instead of visualizing what he wanted to receive, he sat in silence and gave his attention to the presence of infinite intelligence within his own consciousness. He stopped trying to take wisdom and started acknowledging the wisdom already present. He would sit with business challenges, and instead of desperately seeking solutions, he would give recognition to the divine mind that already knew the answer. He stopped taking thoughts of worry and started giving awareness to peace. He stopped extracting plans and started radiating trust. The transformation in Matteo's experience was gradual but undeniable. Within 2 months, solutions began appearing that he had never considered. Opportunities emerged without his usual forceful effort. His business started flowing because his consciousness had shifted from taking to giving. The key was subtle but powerful. Matteo was no longer trying to get anything from the spiritual dimension. He was giving his recognition to what already existed there. He was no longer depleting himself through mental extraction. He was radiating from an inner source. Clients noticed a difference in his presence. He seemed more confident, more peaceful, more genuinely helpful. They were responding not to his sales techniques but to the consciousness he was radiating. He was giving something invisible but completely tangible. This is what Goldsmith meant by give and it shall be given. Matteo was giving his awareness to infinite intelligence, and infinite intelligence was being given back to him as ideas, opportunities, connections. The giving and receiving were one simultaneous movement of consciousness, not separated by time or effort. Another breakthrough story involves a teacher named Maria, who felt completely burned out. She had given everything to her students for 20 years, her time, energy, resources, creativity. Yet she felt empty, resentful, and exhausted. Where was the promised return? Maria discovered Goldsmith's teaching at her lowest point. She realized she had been giving from a human sense of limited personal resources. She gave until she felt depleted because she believed she was giving from herself. This is why the giving felt draining rather than renewing. Goldsmith taught that true spiritual giving flows from consciousness itself, which is infinite and never depleted. Maria learned to stop giving from her limited human sense and start giving from her awareness of divine presence. She would enter her classroom each day not asking how much she had to give, but acknowledging the infinite wisdom and love flowing through her. The change was remarkable. Her work became effortless rather than exhausting. She had more energy at the end of days than at the beginning. Students responded with deeper engagement. Maria was finally experiencing what Jesus taught because she was giving from the right source, from consciousness itself rather than from personal willpower. The teaching transforms when you realize that consciousness is the currency of the spiritual universe. You are always giving your consciousness to something. The question is what? Are you giving it to appearances or to truth? Are you giving it to problems or to presence? Are you giving it to lack or to abundance? Every moment of awareness is an act of giving. When you give your attention to fear, you receive more fear. When you give your consciousness to divine perfection, you receive the experience of perfection. This is the law Jesus taught, and it operates with absolute precision every moment. Goldsmith spent his life helping people understand this principle not as theology, but as practical spiritual science. You are not trying to be good enough to deserve blessings. You are learning to give your consciousness to the blessings that already exist in the invisible realm, and that recognition becomes your visible experience. The old interpretation kept people in spiritual poverty despite generous actions. The true understanding liberates you into the flow of infinite supply because you discover you are not trying to get anything. You are learning to give recognition to everything that already exists in consciousness. If these stories of transformed understanding inspire you, like this video to help others discover what Jesus really taught. Subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment which insight shifted your perspective on giving and receiving. Beyond the basic principle, Goldsmith taught specific practices for giving consciousness rather than things. The first practice is radical simplicity. Throughout your day, notice when you are trying to take something mentally. Notice when you are trying to extract security from circumstances, love from people, or peace from conditions. In those moments, stop the taking. Instead, give your attention to the truth that security, love, and peace exist in consciousness itself, independent of conditions. You are not looking at your bank account for security. You are giving recognition to the divine presence that is security itself. This is the practice of giving. The second practice involves releasing the belief that you must earn or deserve what you need. This belief keeps you in a taking mentality, constantly trying to qualify for blessings. Goldsmith taught that spiritual giving means acknowledging that infinite good already exists in consciousness, available not through earning but through recognition. When you catch yourself trying to deserve love, success, or health, pause and give your awareness instead to the truth that these qualities exist in consciousness right now. You are not working to achieve them. You are giving recognition to their present reality. This shift from taking through effort to giving through awareness changes everything. The third practice is perhaps the most challenging. Goldsmith taught that true giving includes giving up your demands about how good should appear. Most people give consciousness to their desired outcomes, their specific pictures of how life should look. This is actually a sophisticated form of taking. Real spiritual giving means offering your consciousness to divine intelligence without dictating the form. You give recognition to infinite wisdom and then release your attachment to particular appearances. You stop trying to extract your version of good and start radiating openness to how consciousness itself wants to express. A businessman named Robert practiced this with remarkable results. Instead of visualizing specific deals closing, he began each day giving his attention to divine intelligence operating through his business. He acknowledged infinite wisdom without telling it what form that wisdom should take. Within weeks, opportunities emerged that were far better than what he had been trying to force. Partnerships formed that he never would have imagined. Robert learned that when you give consciousness to truth without demands, life organizes itself in ways beyond personal planning. The giving becomes effortless and the receiving becomes miraculous. Another essential practice involves giving consciousness during apparent lack or crisis. This is when most people revert to taking mentality. When problems appear, the automatic response is to grab at solutions, to take thoughts of worry, to extract yourself from discomfort through mental struggling. Goldsmith taught the opposite approach. When challenges appear, that is precisely when to practice giving consciousness to truth. Instead of taking anxious thoughts about the problem, give your attention to the presence of divine wisdom within the situation. Instead of extracting yourself through panic, radiate trust in invisible intelligence. A woman named Jennifer faced a serious health diagnosis. Her first response was typical taking behavior. She desperately searched for solutions, consumed information anxiously, and tried to force healing through willpower. She felt exhausted and more frightened daily. The taking mentality depleted her. Then she remembered Goldsmith's teaching. She began giving her consciousness to the truth of spiritual perfection instead of taking fearful thoughts from medical appearances. Each day she sat quietly acknowledging divine life as the only reality. She gave her awareness to wholeness instead of trying to extract healing from treatments. Her recovery was steady and complete. The final complementary practice is giving consciousness in relationships. Most human interaction operates on taking. People take validation from others, take security from approval, take identity from recognition. Even in giving physically, they are often taking emotionally. This creates exhausting, depleting relationships. Goldsmith taught that spiritual relationship means giving consciousness of the divine presence in the other person. You are not looking at them to take what you need. You are giving recognition to the spiritual reality they embody. You acknowledge the Christ consciousness in them, rather than extracting personal satisfaction from them. When you practice this, relationships transform completely. You stop being drained by people because you are not taking from them. You stop trying to change them because you are giving recognition to their spiritual perfection. They sense this shift and often respond with their own higher consciousness. A mother named Susan struggled with her teenage daughter for years. Every interaction was a battle because Susan was constantly trying to take compliance, respect, and validation from her daughter. Then Susan began giving consciousness of divine wisdom and love present in her daughter, instead of taking desired behavior. Within months, their relationship healed in ways counseling had never achieved. Despite understanding the principle, many people encounter a persistent challenge. They find themselves unconsciously reverting to taking mentality, especially under stress. Old patterns of trying to extract security, love, or success from external sources feel automatic and overwhelming. This is completely normal in the early stages. Goldsmith taught that this struggle reveals the depth of human conditioning. For years, perhaps lifetimes, consciousness has been trained to take rather than give. The mind has learned to grab at circumstances for identity, to extract validation from achievements, to pull security from conditions. These patterns do not dissolve instantly. The solution is not to fight the taking mentality, but to consistently, gently return to giving consciousness. When you notice yourself trying to extract peace from circumstances, pause without self-judgment. Simply redirect your attention to giving recognition to the peace that exists in consciousness itself. This is spiritual practice. A man named Thomas struggled with this for months. He would practice giving consciousness in the morning, then spend his day unconsciously taking thoughts of worry from work situations. He felt discouraged by his inability to maintain the giving consciousness. This discouragement itself was another form of taking. Thomas' breakthrough came when he stopped judging his taking patterns and simply kept returning to giving. He realized that the judgment itself was taking, trying to extract a perfect spiritual state from himself. Instead, he began treating each moment of awareness as a new opportunity to give consciousness to truth. He stopped expecting himself to never slip into taking mentality. Instead, he practiced noticing when it happened and gently redirecting his attention. Over time, the giving consciousness became more natural, more sustained. The key was patience with the process rather than demands for instant transformation. Goldsmith emphasized that spiritual development is gradual. You are retraining consciousness from lifelong habits of taking to a new pattern of giving. This does not happen through force or self-criticism. It happens through consistent, compassionate practice. Each time you redirect from taking to giving, you strengthen the new pattern. Another common challenge involves feeling that giving consciousness seems ineffective when circumstances do not immediately change. People practice giving their attention to divine abundance but still see lack in their bank account. They give consciousness to perfect health but still experience symptoms. This apparent contradiction causes doubt. Goldsmith taught that this challenge reveals a misunderstanding of time and consciousness. When you give your awareness to spiritual truth, you are not causing a future material change. You are recognizing a present spiritual reality. The material reflection of that reality may take time to appear, but the spiritual reality exists now. The mistake is measuring the effectiveness of giving consciousness by immediate material results. This is actually reverting to taking mentality, trying to extract visible proof from invisible practice. True spiritual giving means acknowledging truth regardless of appearances, not because of them or to change them. A woman named Patricia struggled with this for a year. She faithfully gave her consciousness to divine abundance but saw no financial improvement. She felt tempted to abandon the practice as ineffective. Then she realized she was still taking, still trying to use spiritual giving to extract material results. Patricia shifted her approach completely. She continued giving consciousness to infinite supply, but she stopped demanding that her bank balance reflect this immediately. She gave her awareness to truth for its own sake, not as a technique to change appearances. Within 3 months of this genuine shift, her financial situation transformed through unexpected channels. The deepest challenge many face is the fear that giving consciousness without taking anything in return leaves them vulnerable and unprotected. If you stop trying to extract security from circumstances, what protects you? If you stop grabbing at opportunities, will you miss out? This fear keeps people locked in taking mentality. Goldsmith addressed this fear directly. He taught that the taking mentality creates the very vulnerability it fears. When you try to extract your good from external sources, you are dependent on those sources. You are at the mercy of circumstances, people, and conditions. This is the ultimate vulnerability and insecurity. True spiritual giving liberates you from this dependence. When you give your consciousness to the infinite source within, you are no longer vulnerable to external changes. You are drawing from a well that never runs dry. You are radiating from a source that never depletes. This is real security. A businessman named Alan faced this fear during an economic downturn. His instinct was to grab at every opportunity, to take aggressively in a competitive market. But he had been studying Goldsmith and decided to practice giving consciousness instead. He gave his attention to divine intelligence operating through his business rather than trying to extract success from circumstances. If these techniques for overcoming obstacles resonate with your journey, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith teachings, and comment which challenge you are ready to transform through giving consciousness. In advanced practice, giving consciousness becomes your natural state rather than a deliberate technique. You find yourself spontaneously giving attention to truth instead of taking thoughts from appearances. This happens not through effort, but through the gradual retraining of awareness that comes from consistent practice over time. Goldsmith described this as living from consciousness rather than from conditions. Instead of checking circumstances to determine how you feel and what you think, you begin each moment by giving your awareness to the spiritual reality within consciousness. Then you allow circumstances to reflect that inner reality rather than dictating it. A teacher named Elizabeth reached this stage after 2 years of practice. She noticed that her first response to challenges was no longer anxiety or problem-solving. Her natural response became giving her attention to the presence of divine wisdom. This was not forced discipline, but genuine shift in consciousness. When her school faced budget cuts threatening her position, Elizabeth did not panic or scheme. She gave her consciousness to the truth of divine supply and perfect right action. She continued her work with peace and excellence. Within a month, a better position opened at another school with higher pay and more fulfillment. Advanced giving consciousness also transforms how you experience abundance. Instead of seeing prosperity as accumulation of things, you recognize it as the radiation of consciousness. You are not trying to get more. You are giving more awareness to the infinite good already present in the invisible realm. This shift eliminates the tension and struggle around money and resources. You are not striving to extract wealth from the world. You are acknowledging the infinite supply in consciousness, and allowing it to take whatever material form serves your spiritual journey. The giving is effortless because you are giving from infinity. A woman named Rachel experienced this transformation in her business. She had built success through aggressive taking, constantly pushing for more clients and more revenue. Then she learned Goldsmith's principle and began giving consciousness to divine abundance instead of taking market share from competitors. Her business did not shrink as she feared. Instead, it flourished in new ways. Clients came through unexpected referrals. Opportunities appeared without her usual hustling. Rachel was working less but receiving more because she had shifted from taking consciousness to giving consciousness. The universe responds to what you radiate, not what you grab at. In relationships, advanced practice means giving consciousness of love without taking anything in return. This sounds idealistic, but it is profoundly practical. When you give recognition to the divine love present in consciousness itself, you stop depleting yourself by trying to extract love from people who may not be capable of giving it. Goldsmith taught that most relationship suffering comes from taking mentality. People try to take validation from partners, take security from family, take identity from friendships. When others fail to provide what is being taken, resentment and pain result. The taking creates the suffering. A man named Christopher transformed his marriage through this understanding. He had spent years trying to take appreciation and affirmation from his wife. He felt chronically disappointed and resentful. Then he began giving his consciousness to the divine love that exists independent of her responses. This was not resignation or suppression. It was genuine spiritual giving. Christopher acknowledged the presence of infinite love in consciousness and stopped demanding that his wife provide it. Remarkably, as he stopped taking from her, she began naturally giving more. The pressure dissolved and authentic connection emerged. Perhaps the most advanced application involves giving consciousness during apparent tragedy or loss. When life brings death, illness, or devastating change, every human instinct screams to take control, to fix, to resist. This taking creates additional suffering on top of the original pain. Goldsmith taught that even in darkness, especially in darkness, you can practice giving consciousness to the presence of God. This is not denial of human grief. It is the recognition of spiritual reality alongside the material appearance. You acknowledge the pain while giving your deepest awareness to the eternal life and perfect love that exists beyond all circumstances. A woman named Daniela faced her husband's terminal diagnosis. Her grief was profound and real, but she also practiced giving her consciousness to the truth of eternal life and divine presence. She did not deny her tears, but she also gave recognition to something beyond death. This practice did not prevent loss, but it transformed her experience of loss. Daniela found herself surrounded by unexpected peace even in heartbreak. She was able to be present with her husband's final months without being consumed by desperate taking, trying to extract impossibilities from the situation. The giving consciousness held her through what should have been unbearable. After months or years of practice, you begin to see the entire teaching differently. Give and it shall be given is not a command or a promise of reward. It is a description of how consciousness actually works. What you give your awareness to becomes your experience. This is not negotiable or optional. It is the fundamental law of spiritual life. You realize you have always been giving your consciousness to something. The question was never whether to give, but what to give your awareness to. Before understanding the teaching, you were unconsciously giving consciousness to appearances, to problems, to lack, to fear. Now you are consciously giving it to truth. The transformation is complete when giving consciousness becomes as natural as breathing. You no longer think about the technique. You simply live from the awareness of infinite presence within you. You radiate truth not as a practice, but as your natural state. This is what Jesus was teaching. A man named Michael reached this understanding after 3 years with Goldsmith's materials. He could no longer imagine living any other way. Giving his consciousness to divine reality had become his automatic response to every situation. Life had not become problem-free, but his relationship to life had fundamentally changed. At this stage of understanding, you recognize that you are not really giving anything at all in the human sense. You are simply acknowledging what already is. The infinite good exists in consciousness already. Perfect love, infinite wisdom, complete abundance. These are not things you create or earn or extract. They are what you recognize and allow. This recognition is what Jesus called giving. You give your attention, your awareness, your acknowledgement to spiritual reality, and in that very giving, you receive the experience of what you have recognized. The giving and receiving are not separated by time. They are one simultaneous movement of consciousness. Goldsmith spent his life pointing students toward this simplicity. Stop trying to get from the world. Stop trying to take from God. Simply give your consciousness to truth, and truth becomes your living experience. This is the secret hidden in plain sight for 2,000 years. This is the teaching that transforms everything. A woman named Claire finally understood after hearing this message repeatedly. She stopped all her complicated spiritual practices and techniques. She simply began giving her awareness to the presence of God throughout her day, acknowledging it while washing dishes, driving to work, sitting in meetings, just giving recognition to what already existed. Her life did not become suddenly perfect, but her experience of life became increasingly peaceful and abundant. Challenges still appeared, but she no longer struggled with them through taking mentality. She gave her consciousness to divine wisdom, and solutions appeared naturally. She gave her awareness to infinite supply, and resources flowed from unexpected sources. Claire understood what Jesus meant. The kingdom of heaven is within you. You are not traveling toward it or earning it or deserving it. You are giving your consciousness to its present reality, and that recognition transforms your entire experience of life. This is the true meaning of give, and it shall be given. The teaching works because consciousness is the only reality. The material world is the reflection of consciousness, not the source of it. When you understand this, you stop trying to change the reflection and start giving your attention to the source. You stop taking from appearances and start giving recognition to reality. This is why Goldsmith's teaching feels both ancient and revolutionary. It is what Jesus taught, what all mystics have taught, but it contradicts everything the material world tells you. The world says take, grab, extract, earn, deserve, fight for what you need. Jesus said, give consciousness to truth, and everything is added unto you. You stand now at a choice point that every spiritual seeker eventually faces. Will you continue living from taking consciousness, trying to extract your good from the world? Or will you begin the practice of giving consciousness to the infinite reality within you? This is not a small decision. It is the choice that determines your entire experience of life. Joel Goldsmith dedicated his life to making this teaching practical and clear. Give and it shall be given means give your awareness to spiritual truth and receive the experience of that truth. Stop trying to take from conditions and start radiating from consciousness. This is the secret that has the power to transform everything. The practice begins simply. Throughout today, notice when you are trying to take something mentally, taking security from circumstances, taking validation from people, taking peace from conditions. In those moments, pause and redirect. Give your consciousness instead to the spiritual reality that exists independent of appearances. Do not expect instant perfection in this practice. You are retraining consciousness from lifelong patterns, but each time you redirect from taking to giving, you strengthen your awareness of the infinite source within you. Over time, this becomes your natural state. You live from consciousness rather than from conditions, and everything changes. If your understanding of this teaching has expanded through Joel Goldsmith's wisdom, like this video to share it with others, subscribe for more transformational spiritual content, and comment, I give consciousness to confirm your commitment to this practice.